Hi there. In this presentation, we will reach to the final part of the storytelling of data, which is narration. And I hope you still remember that to build up a good story about our data, we need first to set the foundation by collecting the different data elements, building up our data structure, try to clean and manipulate the data, and use different applications for visualization such as Excel or Power BI or Tableau. Now the time has come to build up our story that hopefully we can use it to convince the audience, regardless of their background, to listen to our story and do some resolution. So with this part in mind, let us jump into our presentation and try to remember the ARC model from my first presentation, where we have the introduction, setting the stage about our story, and then try to use the data to develop some insights and visualize it, where the people, they can reach to the aha moment and realize what we have discovered from our data, and then try to make resolution. The good thing that narration, it goes all the way from the beginning to the end of the ARC model, starting from setting the stage about our story and sharing the background. We use different narrations here. And then we use the narration to build up the challenge that can hopefully capture the audience engagement and try to walk in our journey with us to start to explore the data and build some key insights. Once we do that, we also use the narration to help the audience to reach the aha moment and realize what we have discovered from our analysis and visualization, and do some kind of resolution and follow this by making some impact in their future decisions. In the context part, which is the first part when we set up the stage, we can use like the history, the current situation to help the audience to set up their focus on our story. Then we need to establish some relevance by telling the reason behind our story. Why this data story matter to the audience in this time now. And then we set up the expectations of the audience by telling the audience what they can learn from our narration. Once we set up the stage and the audience start to be in line with our story, then we can reveal the problem statement by defining the data and try to create some tension by highlighting the gap between the current state and our desired outcome. This way will explain the consequences of inaction and incorrect decision that we might have if we don't understand the story. And throughout the whole process, we try to engage the emotions of our audience, because if we do that and address their concern, they will continue with us until the end of the story. Here, once we start setting the stage and going through the challenge, we start to build up the audience attention by doing like what we call first exploration of data. So they try to look at the data the way we see it, and then create momentum towards significant insights and start to take a deeper dive into our data. By that time, the audience should be in the same line as we do to develop the same key insights from our data by finding the changes and getting the supporting evidence that we provide for them to develop some contextual significance about our story. Once we do that and they reach the aha moment, then they find the solution that we suggest to them. This can tell you that doing that, it means the audience have gone with us throughout the whole story. And how important is the narration to link the audience attention alongside with our data and our visuals. Once they do that, we can propose them some actions, an implementation plan, and what are the outcomes they might expect and the limitations for our data store. Then we can try to get some kind of quantifiable impact for what we have said. We can quantify the impact of our resolution by the success rate. And I put here some numbers to tell you that if we tell the story the way it should be, we can quantify how much is the impact on the audience. So by checking the improvement in their future implementation, the cost they might save from implementing our story, and the efficiency they might gain from our story. The role of the narration in storytelling, it's very important because as you can see from this image, that it connects the different data points. If I throw some raw data to my audience, they will not be able to understand the story so much as giving them some narration. The narration also will guide the audience to interpret the information the way we do, and then they can understand the insights. The other element in narration that it helps the audience to remember what we have said about the story for a long time and become emotionally attached and having some passion to do the story. As I said, there is a huge difference between raw data and narration and data story. Why? Both of them, they should give us the same outcome. But the raw data might be overwhelming to the normal person and requires time and effort to interpret the data and retain the information from the data. But when we put the raw data in a story, it will increase the retention, guides the interpretation, and create some kind of emotional connection that can help the people to get attached to the story and apply. The effective narration is very wonderful if we try to follow those key components. Number one, the structure. It should be clear, setting the stage, raising the insights, reaching to the aha moment. It should be with a linear structure that can help the audience to follow our story. If we try to go to a circular where we can start into one point and then go back to the same point again, it might be confusing to our audience. So it's good to use clear and linear structure, and in between try to infuse some examples about the story. And when we introduce the examples from real world, we try to engage or listen to the audience emotion and try to make them engage. We can do that by providing some visualization that can capture the audience attention. The other issues that we can use using some analogies or metaphors that comes from the audience background, and this can help them to remember our story and connect our story to their daily life. Other thing that we can use it's the character-driven story. Frame the data around people affected by the data and represented in the numbers. So when we link the story to some people, this will give more engagement from the audience to follow the same pattern that we have done. Also, we can show some contrast between the story before implementation and after implementation. This way of compare and contrast will help the audience to listen to our story. Also, we can use the hero journey, and here we start by ordinarily one, where we can use the normal scenario before the story. Then we start to call the attention or share the challenge of our story, and then share the trials and the challenges before we reveal the outcomes of our story, and then we help the people to do some kind of resolution. So this can tell them from a normal person that doing daily life to a hero that can achieve a certain milestone by implementation of our story. This one I try to visualize the impact of data and narration on the student or the audience engagement. If we use numbers only in our storytelling, the audience engagement and the information retention from our story will be minimal. It would be best approach if we use a balance between telling the story, engaging the audience in the story, listening to their emotion reaction, and try to hook them up. This will make the storytelling more influential and the retention of the information for longer period of time. If I use the narration only without numbers or more than numbers, it will be engaging and it will be retained in the audience mind, but it's not as much as the balance approach. The balance approach where I use number and narration together, and then try to visualize it and engage the audience attention. Our mind works very well with narration because stories activate multiple brain regions and try to create a stronger neural connection. This can help our brain to remember the story and to follow the advices that we provide based on our find. Also, as I said, it will help our emotion to be strongly attached to the story and try to make some action. Visualization is very good to help the people to connect the different bits and pieces of the story. So narration directs the viewer to the most important element in visualization. And this is the reason we need to make our visualization simple so that when we try to do this connection, it will be easy for the audience to follow our direction. We can also try to simplify the language in the visuals so it can be clear, concise, and informative, and use sequencing. We try to avoid the circular narration to avoid any confusion and misunderstanding. Finally, we can use the emotional framing where we can use the language that can really urge the audience to understand the presentation or the story and follow our direction. The next point is tailoring narration to our audience. We start usually by the general audience needs, where we need, before we do the presentation, to check the accessibility and the explanation. And then we try to relate all the concerns and the needs of the different people in the audience, try to relate to them and address them in our narration. And then we make like executive needs, which is the key insights that we need to deliver from our story. And finally, we reach to the expert need where the technical depth and methodology detail included in our narration. So when we build up the narration, it's not only by the easy language or using real world examples, but also try to elevate our level of narration to start from the general foundation and go to the expert. So each person in the audience will be able to connect to our narration. Using anecdotes will be helpful because it creates connection between the speaker and the audience. Personal stories are good example. Also, humanizing data where we can try to explain the abstract information in form of humanly related information. And this will help the people to remember our story after this presentation. Also, we can use the narration to address the skepticism, and it happens quite often when the people start to criticize our data and we might get some objection from the audience. We can use the narration to acknowledge the doubts, the limitation, provide context to our methodology and limitation, and this can give the audience some level of transparency, confidence, and trust to our presentation. We try also to present the counter arguments. So we explain the two different or three different resources that might be against each other and try to build some credibility based on our research, our data collection, data visualization. All of this can be included in our narration to address any skepticism from the audience and use the skeptical moments and comments to be a turning point for the people to trust our story. We can use also narration in different data contexts, so we can use the narration in our methodology, explain in a simple way how we collect the data, how we validate the data, and how we connect it to the current literature or the current situation. We can use also the narration when we build our handout that we can deliver it, like administrative reports or funding proposals. All of these outcomes from the story need some good narration. And it would be good if we can build a draft of our narrated story and share it with other people before we disclose it to the audience, because this will help to build a robust narration. We can use narration, as you can see here, to hook up the audience attention with our story. We can use some kind of surprising stats that can help the people to get attached to our presentation. Or we can use provocative questions that can help the people to just get some attention with our narration. Compelling contrast, where, for example, we can use our biology department operates on 40% less funding while producing 60% more research. This can pretty much attract the audience to see, wow, what kind of performance with reduction in funding. That would be a very good contrast that can hook up the audience attention. We can use the human interest opener, like Meet Professor Zhang, whose data-driven approach transformed learning outcomes. These kind of statements that we can use it at the beginning to hook up our audience attention. Also, good point that when we start narrating our story, we don't use the same pace all the time, but we can start brief, engaging, setting the stage without any overwhelming statements. And gradually, we try to increase the complexity and the pace of our talk. This will help the people to become more engaging and try to follow our narration to see what would be the outcome. Then we share with them our key insight moment. And here we need to talk for a while and then make sure that we give a moment of silence so the people can be up to the speed with our narration. And once we capture the audience engagement and their attention, then we can accelerate the process to help them to reach out to the same application and resolution mode. We might face some conflicts during our data story. For example, conflicts between expectations and reality. The narration will help out to resolve these conflicts by sharing certain statements or stories or anecdotes or examples that can help to resolve this conflict. We might face also competing interpretation. Different people, they interpret the data differently. The narration will play a big role here to standardize the interpretation for all the audience. Resource limitations, and also the narration can explain in details our limitation of the story, and this will give more credibility to the audience about our story and might raise the call for some of the audience to extend our story by making further research. And we might see a conflict between the current and the ideal state of mind. And the story, the narration can explain how can we move from the current to the ideal state. So the narration play a pivotal role on hooking the audience attention, sharing the different steps of the ARC model, resolving any conflict, trying to meet all the skeptical concerns that might come along our way, and help the audience to reach to the same conclusion. Now we see the positive side of the narration, where we can see some kind of interaction between the speaker and the audience, where we can use here the narrative elements to direct the user through interactive elements. And good example, we can use it here like Kahoot or any other web application that can engage our audience by sharing either statements or questions or answering to a survey question during our storytelling to try to interact with the audience in a high-tech model, if we could say. Choose your own adventure, and here we can allow users to follow different narrative threads based on their interest, and then we start to reveal the data complexity as users engage with our story. So this, you could say, is the positive side of engaging audience with our story. During the narration, we need to keep in mind some ethical consideration. Good example is transparency. That when we tell the story, every now and then, we need to convey the message to the audience, our limitation, our expertise, our transparency, and our credibility, so we can get their trust. Number two, we try to avoid any cherry-picky data to support a predetermined narrative. We need to make a balance between the data and the narration. We need also to use the narration in an understandable or easy way so that all the audience from different background, they can understand our presentation. And finally, we need to be honest and tell the people where are the gaps in our data. Once we do that, it will help the people to remember the story. And here is another way of try to visualize the impact of data only, or data and narration, or data and narration and interaction between the audience and the speaker. And it is very obvious that if we put the data, if we build up good narration, and during our storytelling try to engage the audience with our story, this will help them to remember our story and try to make decision after the story. Once we finish our story, once we tell the people, once we try to use the narration in an easy way to convey our message, we come to the decision making point where we can provide some data to help the people to make a decision. For example, restructuring the department, enhancing student retention, trying to advance the application for financial aid. Those are the decision-making moments, and we can use narration here and some data to help the people to make the right decision. Also, we can connect the data to specific decision that needs to be made, so we can emphasize some decision that the people might be thinking about, organize information to make the decision factor clear, so they can try to quantify the impact of the decision, and finally generate some kind of commitment to implement the decisions. Measuring the impact of the data and narration, we can do that by making a simple matrix that can help the people to understand the story and try to put some kind of duration or interaction rate and follow-up questions. And this can give us, as a speaker, what we expect or how the people perceived our story. Then accuracy of audience summary and ability to apply the insight, taking action, decision make, policy changes, or new initiative launch. So here you can see that the impact of the data narration might differ from one person to the other, and we reached the long-term result, which is putting some decisions, making some improvement, and then measure the outcome in the future. This is in brief the narration and how we can use it to complete our story and help the people to understand the story the way we want, and then try to do some decisions. I hope you find this presentation helpful to give you simple tools about the 3 elements of data story, starting by data as a foundation, visuals as a scene, narration as a structure for our presentation. Thank you. Bye-bye.